So let's now get to our main topic for this week on Mastering Dungeons. And that is our first installment of checking out other RPGs. Why are we going to do this? We love D&D, Teos.
We do.
We love it as a brand. We love it as a lifestyle. We love it as a game. And we love ourselves some 5th edition.
Mm.
But in order to understand why we love this game so much, we think it's important as game designers, especially, to look at what works and what doesn't, not just in 5th edition, but in other games. What do other games do that 5th edition D&D could do or could do but decides not to do for a very specific reason? We want to look at all of those questions through the lens of other games.
Yeah.
And so we are going to do just that.
Yes, we are. And I was always surprised by this in my early days of gaming, where I would play D&D and think, this is great, I don't need any other game. And then someone would say, hey, look, Shadowrun. And I'd say, okay, I'll try that for a bit. And then I'd go back to D and I'd be like, I'm going to use some of those ideas that I learned, right? And every game I played was like that. It would help me increase my appreciation of what D&D offered. It would give me new tools and new understandings of how to use what D&D provided, and it made my game better every single time. Made me a better GM because now I knew how to hit things from different angles. So I'm excited, and we're going to start with this pretty bad boy right here.
With that game right there called Shadow of the Demon Lord. So we're going to start with this game for a few reasons. The first reason is it's a really good game. It does a lot of the things that D&D does, but it does it in a different way, especially in terms of campaign progression and character progression. So we wanted to look at that specifically. In later episodes, we may get very far afield of the sort of D20 sorts of games, but we wanted to start in a place that was sort of familiar, but also a little bit different.
Yeah.
And speaking of a little bit different, I'm going to let Teos give you the
As
gory
you can
details.
tell from the cover, this is a dark game. This is a death metal RPG in a number of ways. And so we can provide a bit of a content warning up front. We're going to be reasonable. We will do our best. But the game is dark, and it has some horrifying, gross concepts that you may enjoy greatly, as many of my friends do, or as other of my friends, you may find that is a complete turnoff to you. What's nice is that you don't have to use those parts. I don't in my games, but you should be aware that they are in there, right? So things about entrails and body parts and things like that is found in there, just like any kind of horror movie of that kind might have. So it's good to know that is the tone of the game. Rob is working on a version of the game that won't have that aspect to it. So that'll come out probably this year. So that may be another option if you don't even want to open a book that has that. But again, we're going to be reasonable about this, but we may, say things like the word entrails here and there because there's a lot of it.
And so Teos mentioned Rob, and the Rob we're talking about is Robert J. Schwalb, who is the writer and designer for this game. We could talk for days about all of the things that Rob has worked on in the RPG industry. 5th edition D&D, Rob was one of the lead designers for that game. So that's where we can start. And but he also did a lot of work on 4E and 3E D&D, Warhammer Fantasy, so many books in that
Song of
game
Ice
he
and
worked
Fire
on.
for Green Ronin, right? All kinds of stuff. But what's
Yep. True
really
20 Star Wars. Yep.
what I think makes this game amazing, right, as a start when comparing to 5e, is that this is basically when Rob's working on D&D and he's going like, yeah, okay, let's have a team meeting about this. Here's where we decide to go as a team. He's thinking, I would go in this other direction. And this book is his other direction, right? This is what he wishes 5e was in many ways, right? How he wishes the engine ran of 5th edition. And so it's really cool to see that because it's a set of innovations for your game, that he is putting together into this harder death metal setting that he loves, right?
Right. And it's those innovations in the mechanics that I really want to focus on because, we have seen and will continue to see versions of 5e that make the slightest tweaks and call itself a new game. And in some
Yeah.
senses it is, in some senses it's not. This is not 5e. This is not any edition of D&D. This is its own game. And it's also worth noting that Rob is prolific in terms of writing content. So if you end up liking Shadow of the Demon Lord, there is a bevy of adventures, expansions, variants, etc., etc., etc.
The value of his
So
Kickstarter. I mean, it just those of
yeah,
us who joined his Kickstarters, you just kept getting emails with the latest source book or add-on or what, and it was unbelievable how quickly they came out, how voluminous it all was. So yeah, every part of the game from the core stands on its own, but you can
mhm,
endlessly delve into all the things he provides, often at a very, very low price.
yep. So the setting of the game, as Teos mentioned, it's a role-playing game set in a fantasy world's final days. So reality is fraying as time and space unravel. The laws governing what's possible and isn't are weakening. As a result of this deterioration, threats from beyond the universe intrude, vile demons spawned in the endless void, hungering for utter destruction of all things. Where they tumble free into the mortal lands, they bring death and doom to all. So there is a definite theme to this, and it's a theme of darkness, it's a theme of death, it's a theme of everything falling apart.
Yeah,
But the
this is one where like
mechanics, oh,
every piece of art, right, will have someone's face looking worried. And it may
mhm,
be because of
right,
what's about to happen, what they just imagine will happen in their daily lives, or because a thing is happening to them in the art itself.
you're right.
It's that kind of feeling of I mean, if you're watching Last of Us on TV, it's like anybody there who just expects a bad thing to happen, right? You are on those kind of the end is ahead.
Mhm.
It's a very different setting than most fantasy settings.
Yeah. So I want to point out two things here. One is I did play test this with Rob once, and I liked it. I was a little harsh in my review to Rob, and I have apologized to him several times, even though it was just with the playtest group. Um, and I have played the game maybe 10 times. The first time I played the official game, it was with a DM other than Rob. And I was like, okay, cool. Our party formed. We got through the whole adventure. It was like, oh, okay. I was sort of getting a feel for the mechanics as they were in the final version. And the next 9 times I played were all with Rob, and it was all TPKs before like the end of the second hour, with just horror. And it talks right in the opening, the introduction about the full Schwalb. So the full Schwalb is like completely grotesque, horrible death everywhere. If you don't run away from the encounter, you're not going to survive.
Mm,
Um, the game itself is not like that, though. The game
no.
itself, has the ability to actually play a full campaign.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk now about the mechanics, and we're gonna talk about what a campaign in the Shadow of the Demon Lord might look like.
Yeah, and why this is awesome, right? And regardless of the
Yeah.
setting and what you want to do, you can take these elements and bring parts of them into your game or yeah, riff off of these concepts.
So how are the concepts and mechanics similar to D&D? Well, let's talk about character creation. So the first thing you do is pick your ancestry. That's a quote right from the character creation. So think of race from D&D, but the ancestry determines a little bit more and a little bit less
Mhm.
than what you would get for a D&D race, because your ancestry determines your attributes. And there are four attributes: your strength, your agility, your intellect, and your will. Scores can range from 1 to 20, and the modifiers, the pluses for
Yeah.
those scores, go up by 1 for each point over 10,
So there's
rather than
no
once
odd
for
not
every 2
mattering.
points. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, most ancestries, when you select your ancestry, will give you your attribute somewhere generally between 9 and 11. So like, a human might be 10, 10, 10, 10 in those, and an orc might be a little less intellect, a little more strength,
Mhm.
or whatever. But the game also allows you to one for one subtract one from one attribute um, to increase one in a different attribute. So you are able to tailor that in any way you see fit. Uh, Now, here's my question, Teos. We've all been through the orc. Why do they get a penalty to intellect, or to
Yeah.
intelligence or charisma? D&D needs to get rid of that. This game does that. Is it okay here? I'm not up on my outrage, or I
I
just
mean,
I don't know.
so I mean, no, it's it depends on where you are on this issue, right? The idea is
Right.
that if I say that an orc starts with strength 11, agility 10, intellect 9, and will 9, right? I am saying all orcs do that.
Hmm.
But then I'm allowing customization.
Right.
So there's a little bit of both here, right? There is that idea
Okay.
that this is sort of your archetype.
Hmm.
Every orc is, however, making choices that make it different. But we're saying that overall, this is how they trend, right? So
Okay.
there's a little bit of both here. I think that we don't want to delve into this issue too deeply, but that
No.
is an issue that is worth pondering as to whether the game should have that in there or not, and to
Hmm.
what benefit you gain out of it versus what negatives you get out of it is probably the easiest way to to summarize that issue.
Okay. No, that's
Yeah,
fine. I if we're going to talk about these other games, let's talk about everything in the game.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I just want to get it out there. Ancestries also give you your size, your speed, and your power. Power being like your magical abilities.
Hmm.
We have ancestries like Goblin, Orc, Clockwork, as well as your typical fantasy races of human, dwarf,
And
etc.
this is the kind of thing that games often do. They'll play with balance a little more. And Rob's smart, right? He knows balance. It's not like he doesn't. He knows it as well as anybody. But the
Hmm.
clockwork includes the fact that you have a key somewhere in your body that isn't easy for you to access, and you can wind down. So there are conditions
Hmm.
under which you check to see whether you just stop working and you just
Yeah.
cease to move. And that is very different from a Warforged, right? This is the kind of thing you
Right.
expect in a world that's breaking down. Like, yes, there's clockwork people, but this can happen. And I've had that happen because I like playing clockwork a lot. And all of a sudden, you are not moving, and someone has to come over and give you a crank to get you back up, and
Hmm.
and that counters some of the other things that you get. But it is a major hindrance, right? And it's just, but that's an example of where the story of it does really rise, right? And does really help you tell great stories, and it's part of the fun.
Yep. So the abilities that you have are corresponding in the most part to those attributes: the strength, agility, intellect, and will. So, for example, um, your strength is equal to your health. Now, some ancestries may say health plus one, or strength
Hmm.
plus one is your health, or strength plus two, depending. But for the most part, strength is equal to your health. Agility is your defense score unless you are wearing armor, and then it could be replaced by the armor, or could add for lighter armor, could add a little
Hmm.
to your defense. Um, your perception score is equal to your intellect score, and your will attribute is your insanity maximum, and then will and intellect are also both used with spell casting. So similar to D&D, but different from D&D in the sense
Hmm.
that how these scores are created are simplified down. You don't have to worry about proficiency bonuses. You don't have to worry
Right.
about adding these extra bonuses. The score is it, or the
Yeah.
score plus one is it.
Yeah. And then talk about differences, measuring distances in yards.
Mhm. Yep. So yeah, no, I mean in D&D you think in 5 feet.
Hmm.
So what this game does is Braille breaks it down into yards, where in a D&D game, your character, if it's a medium-sized creature, would control a 5 foot square on a grid, or in the theater of the mind would control 5 feet around it. In this game, everything is in yards. So you control a 1 yard or 3 feet area instead of 5 feet. So it just changes the scale a
Yeah.
bit, but since the rest of the game just moves everything into that yards rather than 5 feet, it really sort of equals out in the long run.
And in some ways, it's clever because what it's doing is it's abstracting a little bit by giving you a measurement that you may not exactly have in your brain, the way you might understand 5 feet and look at maps and
Mhm.
grids and so on. It means that you are making a little more of a judgment call versus an exacting measurement, right? Oh, it's
Mhm.
5 yards away. It's some number of yards. It's far. It's close. It's that kind of
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yep. Yep. So one term I'm going to bring up now, and I'm probably going to bring up in every game we do, is something called game loop,
Mm,
which is what happens from turn to turn. How does the resolution of an
yeah.
action at the start of your turn play all the way through to the end of your turn, and then reset the game? So in D&D, the game loop is you have a certain number of actions or bonus actions or movement or reactions. You say what you want to do. If there's a need to resolve it randomly, you roll the die, you add your number, you compare it to a number, you resolve that, and then you move on. So that's the loop.
Hmm.
Uh, in this game, the loop is similar. You're going to be saying what your action is. If you have other types of actions like free actions to load your weapon, uh, movement, and so on, that's the play loop is similar. One person takes a turn, you resolve all of that, then the next person takes a turn. Uh, However, there will be some differences which we are about to go into
Yeah.
when we talk about these mechanical differences. So you want to talk about the first mechanical difference there, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, one is Boons and Banes, and this is a very clever take on the concept of advantage or disadvantage. And if we often talk about how advantage and disadvantage are heavy, right? It's re-rolling a whole d20 because it's trying to replace sort of all the modifiers that you might have had in the game. And if you have any number of them, they cancel out, right? So you can have 3 advantage, 1 disadvantage, and they just cancel. Here instead, a boon or bane is a d6 added to the roll or subtracted from it, depending on whether it's a advantage or a boon or a bane. And you can get multiple. So I might say, well, the target is cloaked in shadow, so you have 2 banes. And what that would mean is you'd roll 2d6 and you would only take the highest result. So it's increasing the
Mhm.
chances of a number being big, that would then affect the roll more greatly. So,
Mhm.
but I might say, hey, you have 2 banes because they're cloaked in shadow, but a boon because your friend is helping you. So now I subtract it out, which leaves me with net 1 bane. So I roll 1d6 and I would subtract that from my roll because it's a bane and I might miss because of it, or I might still hit. But because these are
Mhm.
smaller effects, but I'm increasing the percentage chance of the number being a bigger effect, right? Then I'm capping it. And so it's a really nice effect that you can add more often, and
Mhm.
and the math of it matters, right? So I'm going to do a thing that has 2 banes, but I'm going to do something else that gives me that removes one of them, right? Or things it causes you to engage with it because it has this math to it.
Mhm.
Whereas advantage and
Yeah.
disadvantage just kind of end, right?
Right, and it cuts down on the swinginess of the game. If you're rolling with disadvantage, right, that second die could be anywhere from a
Yeah.
20 to a 1, and so, your chance of hitting could go down drastically depending on that second die and how low it gets.
Yeah.
Whereas with a Bane, even if you roll a 6, if you were, at a plus enough to hit, that really won't throw things off that much.
Right.
So it sort of flattens out that swinginess of advantage.
Yeah. And because it's smaller like that, it means that you can do it more often and you can have more fun with it, right? So that's where
Mhm.
taking the higher ground or leaping down onto someone, though you can get into more of this encouraging your players to do neat things. And when I've played Shadow of the Lord, that happens a lot where people come up with ideas and that leads to
Mhm.
more of these boons and banes flying around. And a lot of the spells or special features you may have, sort of feat type stuff will give these banes or boons in different situations, and that's a
Mhm.
fun currency to play with.
Yeah, and there are optional rules later in the book that say if you're the player and you have a Bane, you can say I don't want that Bane, but if you succeed, you're giving the DM some freedom to mess around with you. And the same thing with a boon. Right?
Hmm.
You can drop the boon and roll, and if you miss, you still get some benefit from it. So you're sort of playing with that more
Yeah.
narrative storytelling, succeed with a complication or fail forward element to the game, which I like as well.
I mean, initiative is another really cool area, right?
Yeah, initiative. This messes a bit with the game loop in terms of a full round of play rather than just the individual turn. So rather than rolling for initiative, this game has fast and slow turns. And this works really well because of the simplicity of the game and the lethality of the game. So what happens is when combat starts, people who just want to take a fast turn go first. And a fast turn is just an attack without a move, or I think in some cases,
Yeah.
very specific sorts of attacks. So
Or just a move.
any character, yep, any player character who wants to take a fast turn can go first. They do their fast turns. Then when all the players who want to take a fast turn have acted, then the DM, the game master, takes monsters, and any monster that's going to take a fast turn goes.
Yeah.
Then, when all the fast turns are done, the characters who were going to take slow turns get to act in whatever order they want. So they do. And then the monsters who need to take a slow turn, they do their thing. So players are going first, but only fast turn players, and
Yeah.
then so on. And this is good because the game is a little more lethal. So that
Hmm.
sort of coordination may be necessary, but it doesn't bog the game down so much like if you were just like anyone go, then you get this tactical discussion that goes on too long. So I think it strikes a very good balance.
It's really clever, and when you play it, it really works surprisingly well to also take away from the detriment of when a game is a little simpler. And this game at times feels a little bit like, basic D&D in that sort of sense of just hit it with your axe, and do that over and over again.
Mhm.
But these kinds of things of like, well, I'm just going to take an attack so that I can try to drop that thing now, even though I kind of wish I could do a more complicated turn. But I'm going to go fast so I can go first and I can take it down, right? Or I'm
Mhm.
going to go fast just to get to them, and so they'll attack me and not my friend, right? That kind of decision, it leads to these actions happening very quickly. And it's very easy for the
Yep.
DM because rather than saying, what'd you roll for initiative, whatever, you just say, okay, players fast turns, who's going to take a fast turn, and then they just, two people might speak up and one of them decides to go first and you're off to the races and you're done, and very
Mhm.
quickly two players are done, and then you decide whether your
Yep.
monsters are going to take a fast turn. That finishes really quickly, and now it's slow turns after that, but half the party goes super super fast, right? And that's a really
Yeah.
a quick boon to that loop happening very very quickly.
Yep. And there's a charge mechanic where you can move and attack in the same round, or, with the same turn, but you take a bane to your
Hmm.
attack if you do a charge, which shows, both the flexibility of this fast and slow turn and the flexibility of the bane and boon system.
Yeah, and two weapon attacks is sort of like that too, or it has some neat choices around that, and it Banes is
Yep.
how that it's handling that. Yeah.
Yep. There are no skills in this game. You just test your attributes. So if you do something strength based, you roll versus that. So yeah, I'm trying to climb the wall. If it's under if it's not a foregone conclusion that you can, you just make a strength test, a challenge roll. You roll the die, you add your bonus, and you're trying to beat a 10.
Yeah, which is
There
really
are
interesting. It's
sometimes,
it's
yeah,
basically always a 10, right? I mean, you can change that, but
yeah,
it's a strong default.
yeah, the strong default is 10 unless you're rolling against something's defense or going up against someone else's strength, like in a contest, and
Yeah.
then you would roll against that. But it helps keep the system very clean,
Yeah.
and you know what number you're rolling against all the time. And how do you handle variations? You handle it with boons and banes rather than changing that challenge rating.
And it's a neat inverse way of thinking that rather than say, well, the DC might be 15 because it's a hard wall, instead what you'd say is that you make it a roll, but you have a boon, you have a bane. So the DC would
Mhm.
be 10, but you might have more banes, right? It's so crumbling and you're
Right.
getting shot at. You have 2 banes on the roll, right? Rather than
Yep.
say the DC is 25. And that's a really interesting way to go about it. I'm not saying I've never seen someone change the DC from 10, but in general, it's 10. And then it's whether
Right.
there are banes or boons associated.
Yep. There's also insanity and corruption. So again, content warning. I know that we're trying to get the concept of insanity out of the game, but it's a part of the game.
Yep. And this came out
And
in
uh,
2015, right? So just like fifth
sure.
edition includes madness
Yep.
rules, this game does as
Exactly.
well. I know that Rob is working on changing that for his
Yep.
next version.
For sure. For sure. And I'm looking forward to that new version, by the way. And there's also a corruption because this is a dark game. And so dark actions have consequences. Each time you get a corruption point, you roll a d20. And if it's below your corruption score, you roll on a table filled with joyful occasions, such as horrible things happening to certain parts of your anatomy.
Hmm. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's where we get into Shadow of the Demon Lord territory.
Yes.
Uh, we have professions. So when you, I'm gonna sort of wrap a lot of this up
Yeah.
together
Go
here.
for it.
When you start the game, you choose your heritage and you choose or your ancestry and you choose your profession. You get two professions, which are a little bit like a background, but with less prescription and more freedoms.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that you have when you start the game. Your professions could be like academic, criminal, commoner, martial, religious, whatever. And there's also a personality section. There's lots of tables here to help you build your character if you want to roll on them.
Can I just
But
add,
you can also
Sean,
just choose. Yeah.
what I like about this personality section is rather than trying to do what 5e does with lots of these sort of like almost like prescriptive things that you should then hit off of, it asks you
Mhm.
questions about the nature of your character and is more
Yep.
about you thinking through what your character is like rather than these, ideals, bonds, whatever's.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
professions you can use and play at any point. You can at any point say to your GM, hey, I have this particular criminal profession. Can I use that to get a boon on this roll? Sure.
Right. Yep. And that's one of the benefits of having a bit of a simpler character creation process is that since you're not asking all of these other hard questions, it's easier to ask these easy questions like
Hmm.
what do you think of this, aspect of your character based on what you have so far. It's a little bit easier for a player to cogitate on that when they're not having to choose, between 70 different spells
Yeah.
at first level. There's also equipment that you get when you create your profession and your heritage. Is it ancestry or heritage? I keep
I think
forgetting.
it's ancestry. And what I
Ancestry.
like about equipment is
Yep.
you basically roll on wealth, and like in D&D, you get coins, right? And then you buy
Mhm.
stuff. Here you roll, and that roll of 3d6 determines your wealth level and your starting equipment package. And it can be that you just don't have a lot, right? And
Yep.
it's so you may not have rope, right? Not everybody has rope, and I like that for
Mhm.
what the simplicity of this game. It just gives you this very simple thing. You are at this level, and here are the things you start with. On you go, right?
Yep. Yep. So when you begin a game of Shadow of the Demon Lord, you have no level. You just have your heritage and your profession, and you start playing. You're essentially zero level. Then, after you finish your first adventure, you become level 1 and you choose a novice path. And that novice path is going to be your basic class. So you
Mhm.
think magician, priest, rogue, warrior. There's only 4, but that's where your adventure has taken you. And it says
Mhm.
right in the text, right? If you are hitting things with a club, you might want to take the warrior path. If you are trying to do these other things, you might want to take the magician path. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about right creating your character through play,
Yeah.
doing the thing that you have your character do regardless of what skills or powers or traits they have. You just, this is what you want to do. So have the character, have the rules that character follows, do those things. And I think it's interesting because I think Rob worked on one of the box sets for like third or fourth edition, where it had that choose your own adventure
Yeah.
style of building your character. And he may have gained some experience from doing that to bring that into Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Yeah, and so these feel somewhat like classes, and you might, as a first level character think, oh, okay, this is going to be like D&D, but no, that's not the case
Mhm.
because of the number of levels and what each level will advance. And that is, I think, one of the most fascinating aspects of this game, and something that I think a lot of RPGs should be taking a hard look at this and the effect it has on your campaign. Um,
Mhm.
so each level, if you look at the table of leveling up, different things progress. So, for example, level 4 is the second and last time you will advance your ancestry. So, D&D tells you you're a dwarf and then forgets about it forever, unless you happen to take some feat that's like dwarfy related. But you're done, right? That's all. But in Shadow of the Demon Lord, you get to level 4 and you can say, well, I'm going to pick my ancestry's advanced feature, or I'm going to learn a spell. And so everybody gets that choice at level 4 to delve into that. Similarly,
Mhm.
level 1 and 2 are novice path, or from your novice path, so you can be advancing as a magician at level 1 and level 2, but they have choices to them as to what you're getting.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's from a set of what almost feel like feats or spells that you're picking from to add to your character. But they have a wide latitude in what you choose. Then levels 3, 6, and 9, you have your expert path showing greater focus and knowledge than novice. And those are things
Mhm.
like I want to be a warlock or a scout or a spellbinder where I bind things. I'm an artificer, I'm a druid, right? So and again, you have choices at each of those levels of what kind of features you want to pick from those groupings so that you're not just going up a level progression of, say, being a magician. You are really making these very different choices to which aspects of your character you want to advance.
Mhm. And when you advance them, they advance you in the things that you need to be good at for that thing. So you could totally be a warrior as a novice and get those warrior things at levels 1, 2, 5, and 8. But for your expert path, you could go off in a completely different direction and you would gain the things that you need to be good at that path.
Yeah,
So you could definitely take a path of like all fighter and do all the fighter things at the novice, the expert, and the master paths. Or you could diverge a bit, but so that's a way of multi-classing D&D
yeah.
wise in D&D parlance, but but also not suffering as much from it, from like minimization of
Right.
the synergy of them as it, it that solves it a bit here.
And that's because these features are grouped within their own sort of bands, right? So no novice
Mhm.
path choices are all balanced with each other, right? So and one of the things even more on the multi-class aspect is, say at level 1 I could take magician, but at level 2 I could take priest,
Mhm.
right? As my novice path rather than advancing with another magician choice. And
Mhm.
so I know one of the characters I really had fun playing through in a Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign was an orc who was a grave digger as their profession. So I started as a warrior and took my, ancestry feature that gave me kind of cool orc stuff and I'm very battle ready. But then I took spell things that basically magically enchanted my shovel that I fought with, right? So my shovel
Mhm.
started growing in power, making me a better warrior, but it was magic things, not warrior things that I was choosing, right? And that was kind of fun.
Mhm. Yep. So that sort of progression is how the game expects you to go through the campaign. And as you probably realized as we were talking here, we talked about levels 0 through 10. What about beyond that? There is no beyond that in Shadow of the Demon Lord. After each adventure, you level up. So the campaign is meant to wrap up after basically 11 sessions of play, with the understanding that this is a campaign where the world is dying around you.
Mhm.
So there is this clock that's ticking and your time is limited.
Yeah.
And I think Rob probably understood well that even for D&D games, the average campaign length is something like 7 sessions. That's the length that most campaigns last. Just because people run out of time,
Yeah.
schedules, interest. So to set this limit at 11 to get through a full campaign, I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it makes it much more likely for people to say, "Hey, it's 11 sessions, it's 11 weeks. If we play weekly, that's less than 3 months. We can play a full campaign and see how this game works."
Yeah.
And I love that idea.
I think Rob also mentioned that he said, this probably won't be the only RPG you play, which
Mhm,
is very emotionally smart of him, right? To know that most people buy a game like D&D and play it forever, and then they might delve into something else, and then they come back to D&D, and that's just the
mhm,
reality of how people do things. So write for that, write this cool, neat experience you can have. You can play, and we should say, you normally level in Shadow of the Demon Lord whenever you do something significant, which is about once a session. So you could play
mhm,
10 times and you've got your Shadow the Demon Lord experience, a full campaign, and you've seen all this awesome stuff that's happened with your characters. And there's a lot we haven't gone into, right? Like there's master paths at level 7 and 10, some additional things like that. But
mhm.
but you can have this really cool experience in a relatively short period of time, and then go on and try a different RPG. And the game is written to embrace that, to
Mhm.
understand that.
Right, and on the game master side, there's a lot of things that we haven't talked about. The world, the monsters, how all of that works. If you've played D&D, you get the gist of it. Um,
Mhm.
but you can run different kinds of campaigns. There are different organizations within this world that could affect things. So you could run a short campaign and then have a different game master step in, or completely change the way that the world is working and run another one and tell a different story, but still have the fun that the game provides. A very focused, um, well-tailored game for the kinds of campaigns that it is meant to support.
Yeah, yeah. It's a neat setting to this whole their land of Urth has a wild map and neat ideas, and
Yeah,
it doesn't go overly long, right? It gives you the things you need to get started. There are other
right.
supplements that give you more, but they tell you
Mhm,
enough about what are the major elements of the setting and the gods and things like that. And there's a bestiary full of all kinds of horrible beasties that tend to play,
mhm,
in a more of a D&D basic kind of way. They're not overly complicated. They'll have a fun thing or two they do, but it doesn't go over the top. And
yep,
well, the monsters are over the top, but their mechanics
right,
are fairly streamlined. And
right.
yeah.
The only thing that's lacking from the hardcover main book, unless I missed it, is a beginning adventure.
Hmm. That's true.
And I'm sure that there are dozens, if not hundreds of them out there. But for a game that specifically says after 0 level, after you play this introduction, that's when the game actually starts because you've formed your party and you know what's going on. The book gives you examples of 0 level play and how to create an adventure, but I would love to see it from the mind of Rob Schwalb. This is the adventure that I would run for every beginning group, to give them these opportunities to differentiate their characters from each other during play, and to sort of, don't want to use the word funnel because that's a DCC word, but funnel them
Yeah.
into the different directions that the game expects them to go, to make that a little more clear for first time game masters of this game.
And I would recommend a series called Tombs of Desolation, which ran at Winter Fantasy. It is not over the top in its level of horror grossness. In fact, it almost has some sort of heroic elements in some ways while questioning the authority of the land. And it's a two-part series that takes place in a town and then takes you to and then the third part you go to the desert, to sort of figure out where the evil is coming from. And that plays as a nice bridge between a D&D feel and a Shadow of the
Mhm.
Demon Lord feel. So if you don't want to go full Schwab on your first start, I recommend this Tombs of Desolation campaign series. It's on drive through. Very easy to get into. It'll feel, it's a nice way to start with it. But there are lots of zero level or low level adventures that you can start with as well. But that's a nice start.
Who wrote the Desert of Desolation or the
Tombs of Desolation.
yeah?
That's
Do
a
you
good.
remember?
I don't.
I thought it
Jerry
was
might have worked on
Jerry.
it. Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thank you for that because I have three steps of after reviewing a game like this. It's either mild interest, definite interest, or I need to run this campaign right now. And after playing with pre-gens and playing a few one shots and reading this book now, I'm at level 3. I want to run a full campaign of this right now. So
Yeah, I'll
that's
find
that's my highest recommendation.
I will put a link in the show notes. Tombs of Desolation, it also ended up being a sort of extra setting piece. So that's the product
Mhm.
I found when I looked it up, which is written by Rob. But I'll find that adventure series and I'll put a link in the show notes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So we have talked about our first non-D&D RPG game, Shadow of the Demon Lord by Robert J. Schwalb. You can find it at his website, I'm sure, Schwalb Entertainment or Drive Through RPG. And anything else to say in summary here, Teos?
No, it's a fantastic game. I mean, just really top-notch design, really neat innovations. It's so far from a fantasy heartbreaker concept where it's basically just D&D, right? This is, you can clearly see the links to D&D and in fact to 5th edition design, but it's its own RPG, really stands on its
Yep.
own, has its own benefits. Great.
All right. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you to the patrons who help us keep these lights on. Thank you to our Master of Dungeons supporters. The Master of Realms supporters get a special shout out in our show notes. So thank you so much. And we like to give our Masters of the Multiverse patrons their own special shout out. So here we go with Graham Ward, James Walton, Mateus Valero at Twin Portals, Joe Tyler, Krishna, I'm going to say his name different each week, Simonse, Chance Russo at Dragon Russo, Falcon Neal, Shawn Molly. Shawn, it's great to know that you're out there. The Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Travis Lee, Brian King, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, Robin Dermy, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Steve Bissonette, and Craig Bailey. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a patron of the show, you can do so at patreon.com/masteringdnd. Also, if you get a chance, leave some reviews on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to us via YouTube to see our lovely countenances. Teos, where can people find you?
Ooh, find me at alphastream.org. And from there, it'll lead you to all the fun places. Shawn, what's the best place to hunt you down?
You can get me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. The podcast is at Mastering D&D on Twitter. I'm also at Mastodon. Uh, and the show is on Mastodon at dice.camp. You can join our community and ask questions on Patreon, or you can leave comments on the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. So we have survived our first level of fighting against the Demon Lord. What are we going to do now?
We're probably going to have a TPK, Shawn.
Probably we're going to need a little therapy too.
Yeah, that's true. It's good. Seek therapy.
Yep.